Hey everybody, welcome on back. We have now ordered pizza and we're going to move on to our second real world example, which is planting a garden. So you figure you've got a garden, you're going to plant some stuff, and we're going to talk about a couple of the ways that we could model that situation using the very rudimentary tools that we've come across so far. So I've deleted a couple of the things that were on here previously, namely the functions and input and output part, and also the operators and data types. So if you have trouble with that, definitely feel free to go back to the video previously, or go back to the Every Programming Language Ever Extended video, where we kind of show examples of each one of those. Essentially, once we get past variables, we don't really need to talk about data types so much, and operators are things that are just part of the the world that you inhabit now. You can let's say get used to that. So anyway, for our variables, let's talk about a variable for each of the data types that we've gone over so far. So the first one could be variable location. So the location could be where our garden is. So let's say it's in the backyard. And we could have something like variable, we need a Boolean one, so let's say watered today. So we're going to have a very, very simple garden. It gets watered once a day, and whether it's been watered or not is going to define whether we water it that day. So watered today is going to be false. And this is actually going to come in handy because there are times when, as part of the process, you can change your data to make sure that future processes don't continue to happen. And I'll show you what we mean. We're actually going to do a rather, not clever, because it's annoying when somebody tells you that something they're about to do is clever, but it's going to be different than the one we did previously. Previously, for looping, we had a list of pizza toppings, and we looped over those pizza toppings to log each one to the console, or theoretically tell them to the person who we're ordering our pizza from. But for this one, we're going to use our, no, you know what? Scratch all of that. We're going to do the same thing for looping. We're probably going to loop over a list of plants to water them or something. But what we are also going to do is we're going to have a branching situation that's going to change our variable for watered today. So the idea there would be that we are going to water the plants and then change the value of this watered today variable to be true because now they've been watered. So the last thing that we need is we need a var list of plants. So it's interesting because some people will tell you that you should absolutely call this plants, not list of plants, because saying list of plants is bad or something. But I'm going to call it list of plants because I find that sort of logic to be somewhat infuriating. Because why not just call it list of plants? Why just call it plants? But there's probably several reasons, so you're never going to get too attached to anything. So our list of plants will have roses, tulips, and I'm trying to think of another flower that I know how to spell. Violets. So those are our plants. We've got our plants, we've planted them, theoretically they are growing, and now we're going to talk about some branching. So our branching is going to be if the plants have not been watered, and we'll say watered today, we should water them. Then we should set watered today, and we're getting a little bit too involved in this. And what I mean by that is that we're writing pseudocode that is too close to our code. So line 12, instead of saying something like set water today equal to true, which is what the code will do, we might say something like we should acknowledge plants are now watered. And we would do that, we would model that process or that new data by adjusting the value of our watered today variable. And then for looping, we're going to loop over the plants in the list, because let's say we have a friend. Sorry, I was just testing to see if y'all can hear the whatever is going on outside of my place that is rather loud, but it doesn't seem like you can according to the sound level, so we'll keep moving right along. So loop over the plants in the list and log each one to the console. That's always a good place to start, because if you can log something to the console, you've successfully accessed that value. So if you can log it to the console, you can usually call a function on it. You could affect it with a what do you call it? An operator or a method. We could return that value, and all those tend to be like syntax related issues, provided you actually know how to use the expression to access the value itself. Now in the previous video we went over how to access values inside of a list, so please feel free to check that out if you would like to. Spoiler alert, it's basically an index. So this is at index 0, this is at index 1, this is at index 2. So branching, if the plants have not been watered today, we should water them. So in code, we're going to write our if statement. Our if statement is going to essentially check for the value of watered today. So if the plants have not been watered today, and so this one is going to be if watered today is equal to false. Previously we did true because it had to do with if the pizza place was open, but for if they've been watered or not, watered today is equal to false means we haven't watered them today. So we're going to say console.log, we should water them. Eventually you might consider that this could say something like, call a function water plant, and you could call it on some water, on the list of plants, maybe, but for now, let's not worry about that. We'll get into that later. We want to work very, very slowly on small building blocks. Of course, if it's too slow or if building blocks are too small, please feel free to jump to the actual course. I hope that these videos are going to come with an attached link, or maybe you already accessed the link, but you always want to consider that if this ever feels too slow, it's because it probably is, and it's time to move on. But for those of you still hanging out, great to have you here, and we'll just kind of keep marching along at a nice, comfortable pace. So we should acknowledge the plants are now watered, and we do this by reassigning watered today to be equal to true. So what's going to happen is that we'll check to see if the plants are watered. They're not, in this case, so we're going to console.log we should water them, and then we're going to reassign watered today to be equal to true, so that let's say this comes up again, and it's not going to because we only have a little bit of code on the page, but if it were to come up again, we know that we don't need to water the plants anymore today. Okay, and theoretically we could also say something like eventually, and we're not going to code this out, but we're going to think about it. Eventually, we're not going to write eventually, that'd be, well, a disaster, because I'm not really sure I can spell that off the top of my head. Eventually, no spell check, so we might be way off. But eventually, it'll become tomorrow. It will be tomorrow. And when it is, we want to reset our watered today variable. Now I know I just said that we don't want to write code or pseudocode as we are here, or comments that are too close to our code. Sometimes it's going to happen, and this is one of those. So this is a thought. We're not going to code this out right now because we definitely don't have enough, let's say solid ground underneath us to go too wild. But this is the kind of thing that you want to start thinking about as you're getting introduced to data and process modeling. So for looping, in the previous video we described how we're going to do this, and we take advantage of two things. We take advantage of a while loop and the fact that we know where a list ends in terms of its indexes. If an index for a list starts at 0, the last value in that list is always going to be the length of the list minus 1. You're also going to hear me use list and array interchangeably. Now the reason is that an array is essentially a list of items, and in other programming languages it is called a list. But since we're basing most of this on that video that we kind of extended, an excellent video by this guy called Brian Will, hopefully the information is still at the end of that video. He makes a lot of these videos, and one of them is this every programming language ever. So basing it on that, we're going to call it lists and arrays interchangeably. But in JavaScript, an array is the situation. That's what we call a list. So for looping, we need a couple of things. We need an index variable, and we need it to go from 0 to the length of the array minus 1. So the way that we do that, and loop over the plants in the list, this is where our while loop comes in. We say while, and they're going to need a variable here, so we'll say index is equal to 0. So we start an index variable equal to 0. The index variable is going to go from 0 to the length of the array minus 1. And the way that we ensure that is we say that the index, or the loop should continue, our while statement that is, should continue provided that the index is less than the length of the, list of plants? Dot length. So if it is less than the length, then we need to still iterate. If it is ever equal to the length, then we can stop our iteration. So now we want to log each one to the console. That's going to be a simple console.log. List of plants is the name of the array. And then we're going to access that at the index that we've currently iterated to. Then we're also going to need to ensure loop ends by incrementing index variable. Now, one thing that you want to keep in mind, we are ensuring the loop ends by incrementing the index variable, but we could also ensure that the loop ends by moving this condition, whatever it is, closer to a stopping condition. Now, the stopping condition for this is when the index is equal to the list of plants.length, or if it's greater than. We accomplish this by starting it at 0 and incrementing it each time. However, a while statement could also it could also be used to do something like this. And it actually occurs to me, we're going to do that. So after we do this while loop, we'll do a while loop that kind of does what's happening here. All right. So ensure that the loop ends by incrementing the index variable. That's going to be index is equal to index plus 1. There are two other ways to write this exact same statement. The other one is to say index plus equals 1, identical statements, or index plus plus. Now, people are like, hey, why is JavaScript so difficult to learn? It's things like this. It's essentially so many different ways to do a bunch of different basic things and a bunch of different paradigms in which some of those ways are useful, other in which they are not. That's why JavaScript tends to get a bad rap, but it's also one of those reasons why JavaScript is kind of infinitely interesting, to some of us anyway. So there's our while loop. Let's go ahead and console.log. So we should say we should water them because of our statement here. And then we're going to look at all of the plants in our list with this while statement here. So let's go ahead and run that. We should water them, roses, tulips, violets. Again, we get this 3 value. Why that happens, again, we're not going to concern ourselves with. And so let's do one more thing. And this is going to be a while loop, which has to do with watered today. So first thing we need to do is get rid of this. And by get rid of this, we're going to highlight the entire thing. And I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to hit Command /. That's going to comment all of that out. So essentially, none of this code is going to run now. If we run it again, we'll see that we don't see we should water them, but we do see our roses, tulips, and violets. What we're going to do down here is we're going to set up a while loop. We'll say while we have not watered the plants today, we should water them. And we should acknowledge we watered them today. So the way this is going to break down is we'll say a while, and the condition for this is going to be the same as our condition for this. We're going to say while watered today is equal to false. Before we get any further, you should note that what we're about to do is called contrived. And by contrived, we mean you probably wouldn't use a while loop. You'd probably use an if statement. Or you wouldn't use a while statement. You'd use an if statement. The thing is that we can use a while statement or a while loop. And by the way, when I say while statement or while loop, what I mean is that people call those two things interchangeably. They refer to the same idea. It's officially called a while statement, at least according to MDN, which is the Mozilla Developer Network. Probably a little bit outside of your capabilities right now if you're on this video, but eventually it will be a very useful resource for you. So we can use a while loop or a while statement. And so because we can, why not see if we actually can do it? So we should water them. This is going to be our console.log. We should water them. And maybe this should even be something like we water the plants, describing what we're actually doing. And so now we could suggest that the plants have been watered today. So this is where we acknowledge that by reassigning watered today to be equal to true. So the same idea that we did here, which didn't really make much sense because it's like, hey, it's over anyway. Like up here on line 15 when we said water today is equal to true, nothing really changes if we don't say that. However, here, it's absolutely necessary because what's going to happen is this while statement is going to keep looping, coming back here to the condition and checking to see if it's made it to false yet. If it ever does, then the while statement stops. And we make sure that it does by reassigning water today to be equal to true after we water the plants. So now that we run this while statement, and we'll see we water the plants, and then nothing. Excellent. So that seems to be enough to be getting on with for right now. Thanks for watching this video. In the next one, we're going to go over, I think it's a classroom and a teacher, and then we'll get into the Eloquent JavaScript read-alongs. And essentially, that's just going to be me reading Eloquent JavaScript and messing around with some of the code that comes up. So hope you're enjoying this video series. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.